So Gerd, I just have to mention, your story is so riveting, and what you went through is so unbelievable. And added to this, you and your brother became one of the Kindertransport, which is another phenomenal part of Holocaust history, Jewish history. So if you can tell us a little bit about how your mother made that decision to allow you, it must have been one of the hardest decisions for a parent to send their children to a country, to a place where they have no connection and they don't know what the future will hold. It's a very courageous decision to make.
I think there's so many different levels at which to respond to that question. The easiest one for me is to recall the context in which she had to make that decision. And think about others who made similar and much harder decisions. The one thing I think you have to rule out immediately is any sense of heroic consciousness. I don't know about other mothers, but I know in the case of my mother, whatever she did and how she did it and when she did it, she did for her children and husband. I never heard anything from anybody in my life about my mother that runs counter that kind of impression. She had a sense of responsibility and duty to her family members, to her family members, just family memory, but most importantly to her children and husband. She made sure that her children knew all about their father. She never for one moment allowed us to forget him. Never. And whatever she did was in that context. I think, like so many other parents, Kindertransport parents, in her case, maybe a little bit more so, she believed in God. She wasn't necessarily a Shomer Shabbat, a Shomer Mitzvot, but she certainly was a deep believer. And she knew what her responsibilities were. And she acted on them. So she became a housekeeper for quite a number of years. She worked far away from us. She figured out a way how to board us with strangers and relatives.
But her decision to send you on the Kindertransport, you and your brother,
They made it together.
They made it together.
With my father. She didn't make that decision alone.
And
she executed it alone. She executed it alone. But they were in touch with each other because Holland Holland was neutral
They could
for quite a
communicate.
number of years. So there was some correspondence with my father.
And what is your recollections of going to when you and your brother were told that you're going on the Kindertransport, that you're going to England, and you had to go to Otwock, right next to Warsaw, to catch the train? Do you recall? Do you remember that episode when you left your mother and you?
Yeah.
Can you recount it, because it's historic. It really is historic.
This may surprise you, but I had a child's memory and experience of being sent away from my family into a summer camp in Germany, where I spent 7 or 8 weeks away from the family. I lived in the summer camp. I had done that before I was 10. And I think part of me got some chashara training from that childhood experience. Otherwise, I don't understand why I didn't collapse. I have to be very careful how I express these things, because the opportunity for self-glorification is very high, since I felt completely responsible for my brother.
And you were only 11 at this time.
Completely responsible for him. And so that the high point of that tension of responsibility came when our names were being called out in Poland for going on board ship. I think 6 or 7 names didn't show up. And there was a terrible moment when my name showed up on a list that was going, but my brother's name wasn't right afterwards. It came after a few names. And the celebration between the two of us was, I remember it so vividly.
And can I ask you, do you remember saying goodbye to your mother when you took the train?
Oh, yeah.
When you left, that must have been very difficult to say goodbye to your mother.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. But either there or elsewhere, I became a master of suppression. I just suppressed any scared, any feelings that this is impossible. I just suppressed it all.
But you had, at a boy of 11 with your brother,
Pardon?
being only 11 years old, you had to go onto a train by yourselves with your brother, and I think Yossele joined you.
Pardon?
It was you, your brother, and Yossele. I think he was with you as well.
Right.
And you went to a place called Otwock by yourselves.
Right.
And then you stayed there till, I think they had to get, Jewish families in England had to confirm that they would support the Kindertransport. That's why it took so long for you. It took a while for the Kindertransport to leave, because you had to have the permission of the Jewish families in London.
Oh. But I wasn't privy to any of that. What I was learning along the way was that nothing is permanent. absolutely nothing. And you had to be prepared for anything. Nothing is permanent, you have to be prepared for anything. My primary responsibility was my brother.
So
I was responsible for my brother.
Now you left very late in August.
Pardon?
You left very late. It was in August 39.
Right.
It was just before September. You left, and I think before you left on the train to go to catch the boat that would take you to England, you had to have your hair shaved for Last. You recall that incident?
Yeah. Yeah. But it was part of the routine. Once you were in the process of being shipped with children, that was one of the ordinary things in life. Traumatic, sure, but you knew it was going to happen, and you just did it.
And good, do you remember the train ride when you went to Warsaw and they were now mobilizing because they knew that the invasion is imminent? Do you remember going on the train ride from Warsaw to Danzig and then to the port Gdynia where you took the
Yes,
boat?
very clearly. Very clearly. And that's largely because Poland was mobilizing. So when my brother and I and others in our families ended up on the Warsaw railway station, we were all very conscious that war could break out any minute, although we had no idea what war breaking out any minute really meant. We just heard the words, and it was very scary, but didn't really know what it meant. So we were in a kind of automatic response mechanism. The moments in the Warsaw station were really terrifying. Really terrifying. Because on the one hand, my brother and I came to Warsaw with the other children from Odwodsk, and suddenly found ourselves in Poland, in a Polish situation where the military was mobilizing for war. It was all around us. It was all around us. And at the time I was barely aware of some of the dramatic situations that were all around me. For example, I had no idea that Joseph's mother had made her way from Spongin to Warsaw to intercept Joseph, take him out the Kindertransport, and take him back to Spongin. No idea. I learned about it afterwards. I had no idea that that mother, in the Warsaw railway station, where she saw other parents bringing their children to the station in order to get them on our Kindertransport unsuccessfully, was on the verge of pulling Joseph off the transport. And then in the face of the behavior of these other mothers and fathers, she changed her mind and let him stay on transport. And I'm not making up this story. She told it to me after the war and after she survived in Joseph's and his wife's house in London many years afterward. So the decisions that mothers and fathers and children made in that small space of the Warsaw railway station and in that particular moment in time, they were terrific. They were horrific. Horrific. And they happened so quickly. So quickly.
It must be the most difficult decision to make for any parent to make.
My brother and I didn't have to make the decision, and it was all made for us. But she, Joseph's mother, she made them on the spot. Watching other mothers put their children on the train, and there she is, wanting to take her son off the train, off the transport, and having to decide whether they were right or she was right. And she's an Aguda mother. She's just not an ordinary Jewish mother. She's an Aguda mother.
It's very orthodox.
Ultra-Orthodox. Wig and all.
So here we have a picture. This is before the... This was, I think, you and your brother. Yeah, it's you and your brother on the bottom. And Joseph's in this picture as well. This was before the Kindertransport. It's amazing. So she made the decision, and you were together, in a way, you were in charge of your brother and Joseph. You had to be the adult. You were the guardian.
Yes, that's right. And I was very conscious of it, because I think I wrote about it in Nightmare's Fairy Tale, but it's still with me. The memories are still with me. It's mundane, it's ordinary, but it's so revealing. We're on board the Warsaw.
But what is your recollections of Danzig?
Pardon?
What do you remember about the city of Danzig? Do you remember?
About?
Danzig.
Danzig, oh. Not much more than I wrote about. I remember very well, very clearly, why Danzig was important and what was happening in Danzig. And being scared as hell that we'll never get through Danzig, because of all the things that we were hearing about Danzig. We could easily be caught in crossfires and who knows what.
There were many Germans there, many Nazis.
Yeah, the Poles and the Germans. They each threatened to take over this free city. So we were hoping that it remained a free city until we get through it, which fortunately it did.
And going on the boat, you remember the boat was the name of the boat?
Warsaw.
Yeah. And you remember going onto the boat?
Oh yes, for sure. For sure. I think I remember going on the boat, I remember going off the boat, I remember a lot of things about the boat. And I was trying to tell you a minute ago, Joseph and Manny and I bonded the first meal we had on the Warsaw because we were served eggs, mountains of eggs. I still see them. I still see them. And so we eat egg number 1, we eat egg number 2, and then Joseph takes the third egg and I tell him, no way. You're not allowed to eat more than 2 eggs. And with that, suddenly you had 3 brothers. Absolutely 3 brothers whose heart was broken when we had to leave him in London, in England.
Yeah. And when you got to Southampton,
Pardon?
you get to Southampton, and the date is, you arrived in August the 29th. It's incredible that you arrived literally just before the outbreak of when Germany invaded Poland.
Right.
August the 29th.
Pardon?
You arrived on August the 29th in England.
Yeah.
It's if it would have been delayed a few more days, you wouldn't have made it.
Yeah, right. So what's new?
That's incredible. And there were some of the children that they didn't have Jewish homes in London and they weren't on the list and they didn't make the Kindertransport.
Right.
Which is also a very sad part of our history as well.
Right. Well, the most dramatic moment was in Voyage, when some children were not on the list.
Yeah.
That's when the worst happened. To realize some children were going to be left behind.
It must have been so difficult, so traumatic.
But we couldn't do anything about it. One of the things I learned, at least very early on, how commonplace my situation was of having to accept helplessness, that you just were not in control. I mean, a 10-year-old thinks he's in control of everything. And you suddenly have to recognize you're not in control of anything. And I used to tell myself, well, all 10-year-olds have that experience. All 11-year-olds have those experiences. Just different circumstances. But I don't think that's the case. I think the demands that adults placed on us children were so outrageous, that it's a miracle we didn't collapse under the pressure.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Good, you arrive in London and then you're taken to Jewish families.
Right.
And it was the 3 of you as a unit.
5 of us.
There were two Jewish girls as well.
Yeah.
That's Paula and Frida.
Yeah.
So the 5 of you taken to, you're right, to a Jewish family.
Right.
And I think you were near Hyde Park.
They had a big apartment.
It was in the middle of London.
Pardon?
I think you were near Hyde Park, in the middle of London.
Yeah, right. Right.
And they were good to you, the family that took you in?
Pardon?
The Jewish family that took you in, they were good to you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But they didn't have us for very long.
Because the war broke out.
Yeah, right. So we were we turned from refugees to evacuees.
So I think you went to the Jewish free school.
Pardon?
You went to the Jewish free school.
Right.
And then those children from the Jewish free school had to be evacuated.
Right.
And you were all sent to a town in Devon, Tarleton in Devon.
Right.
So what is your recollections of going to Devon? What do you remember when you arrived there? And
By that time, everything was part of an adventure. I mean, every moment was new. Every other person we met was a stranger. And I don't quite know, or I don't remember how I arrived at the conclusion, and then what I did with that conclusion, namely, my position as older brother and caretaker now of Joseph how are we going to manage a Christian world? We came out of a Jewish world. How do you live with Christians? How do you do that? How do you trust them? This is after all 1939, 40. How do you do it? One step at a time for sure, but it's sort of a black umbrella hanging over your head. Fortunately for us, the people that were involved were angels.
There's Polly and Ruth Gosling. Polly and Ruth Gosling.
Exhausting.
Polly and Ruth Gosling.
Gosling, yes.
They decided to take you and
Right.
and Yossel.
Right. Yeah, I mean, good Anglicans, anti-Semitic neighbors, anti-Jewish neighbors, wanting to do the right thing as Christians for Jews under the circumstances, connected with relatives and friends who were in the business of converting Jews to Christians. All the circumstances designed to destroy your past. They were all in front of us. All in front of us. And in retrospect, there were some reasons why we won and they lost. Because we were with a Jewish group connected to a Jewish community, related to a Jewish teacher in Tarleton for the first months of the war, right? But then all the others left. They went home.
Or the evacuees, those the non-refugees, they went back home.
They went back home to London to face the Blitz. And Joseph and I and and the three girls, we were left alone in Tallahassee.
It was Paula and Frida. Paula and Frida, yeah.
Right.
But you organized a Seder.
Yeah, right.
And you took the Seder. You did the
Right,
Seder?
Right. I mean, it's a tribute to the Goslings, not to me. It's really a tribute to the Goslings that they facilitated all my efforts to retain a Jewish connection. Joseph and the girls were much younger than I was. Much younger, 3 years older. And I'd been raised as a Zionist who was observant enough to pay attention to the Chagim. Shabbat lost its importance. But there were certain elements of the bonds of the past which were just a given. I mean, just couldn't do without them. So, I guess as the oldest, I then took responsibility for making sure that we commemorated Pesach. That's no mean feat.
That's a major achievement.
No
that you
mean
did.
feat.
And I think they respected your decision not to eat meat. You never ate the meat. I think the Goslings respected your decision not to have
until the
meat.
very end. I don't know why we finally gave in, but right.
And did you have any communication with the Jewish community in London? Did they send anyone to come and visit you, or?
Not that I remember, no. Not that I remember. Our connection was with our teacher. I forgot his first name. Korman, yeah. He tried very hard to facilitate. And it's so satisfying and so amazing that this cone, this same very cone, ends up in Europe in the refugee camp, displaced persons camp, that's housing Joseph's mother and sister. And his presence, Cohn's presence at the meal that they ate together, where the mother showed her picture, because she knew her son was in England somewhere, but she didn't know where. Brought the house down, so to speak.
So you have a lovely picture in your book of yourself and Manfred and Yossel in 1940. And look, they took good care of you. You look well dressed and happy, smiling. It is. It's remarkable how you survived and how you how you never gave up, how you continued. But you had communication with your mother and your father. You could write letters in the beginning.
Before the war broke out, we did. And we were reunited with my mother in 1940. That was almost immediately, relatively speaking.
How long did you spend in Devon?
Pardon?
How long did you spend in Devon with the Gosslers?
Well, we got to Devon in August 1939.
I think
And I think we
September.
left Devon in September of the following year.
So you were a year. You were literally like a year there.
It was a year. It was about a year. And we left to sail with a 3-day aircraft convoy. And then the ship went by itself.
But I think if your mother's brother, he was
Yes.
he had emigrated to England in '39, Sally, and he came to see you in Devon, and here's a picture. And I think he was very instrumental in
Yes, absolutely.
organizing,
Absolutely.
because you had no papers, you were stateless.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But you had to go by yourself. You had to go to the consulates by yourself to get the papers.
Right.
And then here is a certificate, identity certificate that you managed to obtain. Gerd Korman. It's incredible. And Sally, you had a good connection. You were close with him. He had a good connection with your uncle, with your mother's brother.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He's with the British uniform. And when he organized that you would go on the boat, when you got the documents that you could come, and because your mother she went back to Germany and then from Poland, and she managed to get through the neighbor, through Christian Gessler, she managed to get a passage to New York.
Somebody's busy.
The planes flying above.
I haven't heard this before. It's like this.
Does this bring back recollections of when you were in London, when there was a blackout and a bit of a blitz? I don't know that you witnessed, but your mother actually managed to get to America.
Pardon?
Your mother managed to get documents, and she managed to leave Germany. She was very fortunate that she went by herself.
Right.
But she was in communication with your father.
Right.
And she came there with very little money, with virtually penniless. Your mother, when she arrived in America, she didn't have much.
No. She worked.
She worked. When you had to leave the Goslars and when you had to say goodbye to Yossela, it must have been very traumatic, because you had developed this closeness.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Because no, because I knew what Manfred and I had to do. There was never a question in my mind of not leaving Charlton. Never. There was always the connection to my mother, and to reach my mother, to go to my mother. And the Goslings knew it. And so long as there was an active connection with my mother, there was the active connection with my mother. And then, I mean, in retrospect, I don't quite know how that really worked. But we were children, right? And my connections to Joseph became very similar to my connections to my brother. And yet they remained very different, very different. I had no emotional problems leaving Joseph. I was going to my mother with my brother. And Joseph couldn't come with us, and that was the end of it. Period. Full stop. Exclamation point. In retrospect,
But leaving Joseph, it must have been difficult to say goodbye
to Joseph.
to Joseph.
Well, I'm trying to share that moment with you. It was and it wasn't. Once it was clear to me, I've got to be very careful because these kinds of conversations make the self-serving explanation very attractive and much too easy.
It's true.
But the bond with Joseph, at one level, superficially speaking, was a brother. But I knew he had a sister somewhere in Palestine. And there's somewhere he had a mother. And and I knew there were relatives in England. So I knew Joseph would be okay. That's at one level. At another level, and I don't know if the word level is the right word, but at another level, we had become very close, very, very close. And as in many situations that I was in, or at least as I remember having been in, I knew there's nothing I could do about it. I didn't have the option of saying no to my mother.
Yeah.
And I had no way of bringing Joseph with us. I learned very quickly that he thought we had abandoned him. And he was right. He was right. At the point we were together in England, he had no reason to expect his family to remain alive. That's a fact of the matter. He hoped they would. We were in touch, etc., etc., etc. But we all knew enough to know they could all disappear.
But Gerd, what's so sad is that the two sisters, Freedon and Paula, they unfortunately didn't have family that could come in and rescue them.
I was never close to those two sisters. And I suspect it was one of the reasons because their household, their Christian household, moved very quickly to convert them.
That's a tragedy. That is such a tragedy. And they were converted.
Yeah,
They were baptized and they were converted.
By 1945 they were converted. But they were converted only after, I think, they forced the English family that they were with understood that their parents were dead.
Now, Gerd, I have to ask you a very difficult question. And this begs the question, why did the Jewish community, why did they not help? Maybe bring them back to London or put them in a Jewish family? Because by the inaction, it caused these two girls to lose their faith. And that's not what the parents initially had intended when they sent them on the Kindertransport. It's a very difficult question.
I've thought a lot about this issue. A lot. And at a certain point in my life, I became a father and a husband with 4 of my own children. And I came to appreciate what's truly involved in opening your home to a stranger and making that stranger part of your family. I realized very early on in my life how easy it is to have expectations for the other to do the right thing when in fact you know you probably can't do it yourself.
So true.
And I think English Jewry and its committees and its leadership probably did as best as they could. But it wasn't enough. And yet the minute I say that, the minute you put on the table the expectation in a realistic manner, the other option is much too powerful, much too powerful. You allow a child into your family, a complete stranger, you allow it into your family, and now suddenly you have to share everything that you planned for your own children for this stranger. How do you do that? The fact that some people did it is magnificent. But how do you do that? And most people couldn't do it, or wouldn't do it. And I think if somebody tells you that they could and would, that's bullshit.
It's looking from the other side, and it's true. You're right. It's so true.
So when you read these discussions by clerics, Jewish clerics, or Jewish people running agencies and committees, and you read about the negligence, what I was always struck with was the ordinariness of the negligence. How ordinary it was to forget about those kids. How ordinary it was to just let them be. How long do I have to worry about World War II refugee children and their well-being in my neighborhood or my England? How long? How long? And for whom? And why me? Why not the neighbor? And look at all the money it's going to cost me. And look at all the emotions it's going to claim on me. Much easier to bypass it. Much too busy. Somebody else is just a man and wife. Let them take care of it.
But good. Look at the consequences. These two girls lost their Jewish identity and their Jewish faith.
Right.
And I think years later you actually met.
Pardon?
Years later you actually met one of the sisters. Many years later you actually met. Many years later you came back to England and you met one of the sisters.
Say again?
Many years later you came back to England and you actually met. You went to the town and you met one of the sisters.
Right.
Yeah. And you met Yosela many years later, and you also the Goslars. Many years later you came.
Right. Right. Well, I recognized very early that the Goslings were very special. Very special. I mean, here are two Anglican women who take care of these Jewish kids, make no effort whatsoever to convert them. Nothing. Take them to church every once in a while, but that's only to make them part of the family. Never. I don't know how many Goslings there are, but they were angelic. Just angelic. I owe them everything. I certainly owe them my appreciation for what's potentially possible among Christian families towards Jews.
Yeah.
And even though I also know they have friends and maybe even relatives who are very gung-ho in converting Jews, and there's always the possibility that even among the two Gosling women, ultimately conversion was a dream come true. They kept it at a distance. They held it off, I think. Or they understood what they couldn't do. I mean, they really related to the temporariness of the situation that the war was imposing on them. And unlike their neighbors, or some of their neighbors, they didn't take any steps, not one, to pull us in their direction. Not a single step.
And good. Many years later, I think your mother met with the Goslings.
Yes.
To show her appreciation.
Oh. And how?
Yeah.
And how? My mother, by the time my mother did this, my father had returned from the camps. But we had no money in New York. And from somewhere, somehow, my mother found the money of going to England, visiting Ruth Gosling, and taking her to the beach. I mean, my mother knew what she was grateful for. She knew. Because she knew exactly what the Goslings had done. The Goslings never once explicitly touched our Jewish commitments. We went to church with them every once in a while, We celebrated Christmas with them. But for the year at least, it never crossed the line. It never crossed the line.
It's amazing. It really is. It's remarkable.
Absolutely. And the hospitality Ruth Gosling showed my mother. You know, when my mother felt so obligated to come visit her, this was my mother's idea, nobody else's idea. And she was not a rich woman to find airplane ticket money. But she made it her business to make sure she met Ruth Gosling to say thank you personally.
It's incredible.
Yes, it is incredible.
So I just want to ask you, when you found out the news that you're going to be reunited with your mother,
Pardon?
when your Uncle Sally came with the news that there's a possibility that you're going to be taking a ship to America and being reunited with your mother, it must have been also you must have been very grateful and very happy that you're going to now be reunited with your mother.
I don't understand the question.
You're going to, when your uncle gave the news that he's arranged that you're going to be reunited with your mother, you and your brother, that you were going to take the ship.
Oh, yes.
So can you take us on to going onto the ship and the voyage? Do you recall?
I have to go backwards because I think the answer to that question lies in what happened from the time we got off the ship to be embraced by my mother in New York, at New York Harbor, and going with her on the subway, and changing at Canal Street, and dropping my boxes full of clothing, and then ending up not living with her, living with strangers, and realizing what my mother had done and what she asked to do. It was very touching and overwhelming and disappointing, all at one time.
But the ship that you went on, do you remember the ship? I think it was called the Camerona?
Yes.
Was it an adventure, or did you feel...
Yes. No, an adventure.
But you got seasick on that ship as well.
Pardon?
You got seasick.
Yes. Yeah, but it was an adventure. From beginning to end, it was an adventure. And if it wasn't made an adventure, then I turned it into an adventure.
But to think you were only 12 years old at the time,
right.
and your brother was 3 years younger than you, 3.5
right.
years. Two little boys going halfway around the world.
Right.
It's unbelievable.
No.
It's very courageous.
No. No, it was an ordinary response of two children coming to their mother.
But the other...
And they were being naughty.
Did you realize that there, or was it known that there were U-boats, that you were in German-infested waters, that many ships had been sunk by the German U-boats, that it was a dangerous voyage?
Oh, absolutely. At the time, oh, absolutely.
It really was a dangerous voyage. There were ships that were...
No. I mean, but we were on an English boat with English sailors who knew they could get torpedoed any minute. So the context in which we were conscious of our situation was a general collective consciousness. Everybody on board that ship knew a torpedo could hit any time. And while we really didn't know what the hell that meant, we certainly didn't think it was going to become a tea party. So it was scary and adventurous both at the same time.
And when you eventually arrived in America,
I think I felt the loneliness of our position and the dangerousness of our position most sharply when I realized one day that on board that ship leaving Scotland, we had a single RAF plane running cover for us for 3 days. I think I got that right, for 3 days. In other words, we must have been within flying distance of airports where they could keep an eye on us with one plane. And then after 3 days, there was no cover. We were in the open sea, and if a German U-boat happened to find us, we get sunk. Was that complicated and that easy?
and I think eventually that boat was sunk.
I think afterwards,
On another
or was
point.
damaged, something or other. Yeah.
And what is your recollections when you came to America? I think you saw the Statue of Liberty and
Yeah, all the right experiences. But in my mind, they're totally overwhelmed by coming back to my mother when we left the ship.
it must have been the most emotional moment when you and your brother
Absolutely.
met your mother again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But something about me, I guess, that's quite revealing. Instead of breaking down into tears or joyous laughter,
You sang a song. You sang a song.
I sang my song.
Can you sing it? Do you remember the words?
I don't remember it really. Lustig ist das Zigeunerleben. Meaning, happy is the life of a gypsy. Never forget it. The accuracy of that identification for the rest of my life. I mean, I was always partially a gypsy.
You were always wondering and always, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But the connection with your mother was instant.
But
You developed a very strong reconnection with your mother.
in English, did you say?
A reconnection with your mother.
Right.
It was instant reconnection.
An intense connection. In German, was a German language connection. Yeah, I mean, it was. And I must say, to my credit, I had complete appreciation what she was trying to do.
But
In other words, I could have held her with a bad memory for having boarded us out in order to hold a job. But
she wanted you to be in a Jewish environment, in a Jewish environment.
I understood exactly what she was doing and why.
And here's a picture in 1943 with your mother and your brother and you. And look, you in suits. You remember your brother's bar mitzvah? Did you have a bar mitzvah?
Oh, and how? And how? And how? I was a model bar mitzvah student in a congregation in Brooklyn. And they tried to milk it for every dollar to the synagogue where it was being held.
Do you remember the name of the synagogue?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure.
What was it
Among
called?
the reasons why I remember it so well is I felt so lonely in the synagogue. We didn't have any seats. We had to sit where there happened to be a space. I could go on and on and on with all the symbols and emotions of refugee life and refugee status.
What was the name of the synagogue?
The Glenmore Shul. I don't remember the Hebrew name. Glenmore.
And it was a joyous occasion, the bar mitzvah. It must have been
A joyous occasion? It was mixed.
because your father wasn't there.
Right. Right. And one of the reasons it was mixed is because I knew for whom the bar mitzvah was being held. It wasn't for me, it was for the shul. They used it as a fundraiser.
Well, it's not easy, and good having been reunited with your mother, and now you're having to be,
Pardon?
you know, after you met your mother from the boat, and she was staying in an area that wasn't very Jewish or religious, and then you had to be boarded out to other homes again.
Right.
It's not a simple thing. It must have been very difficult for you and your brother.
Yes, it was.
And also not know, well, you knew English, but
Right.
you were in a strange country again,
Absolutely.
and going to school.
Going to school was another matter. No, that was another big matter. That went reasonably well because we spoke English. And so that as I remember, the only major characteristic that distinguished us was that when we first came, we had hobnails in our boots.
And good, do you remember the schools that you went to, when you first came to America?
Yes. Yes. PS 76. Public school number 76 in East New York, Brooklyn.
And I
You
think
keep asking him if he remembers. He remembers
he remembers
everything.
I know, it's incredible.
He remembers everything.
But I think your mother wanted you to go to a more frum school, but it didn't, to a Talmud Torah, but it didn't work out.
It was terrible.
I didn't understand what you were saying.
I think your mother wanted you to go to a more religious school, to a frum school.
Oh yes, oh yeah, I think I read about
You did?
it. Yeah,
But you were happy in the public school,
very,
and you made friends easily.
very. Yes, I did. Good friends, right. No problem. Except I had this real consciousness of being a refugee.
And about being Jewish, was that an issue?
Pardon?
Being Jewish in a public school, was that ever an issue?
Not particularly. No.
In America, that was
Other
different.
Jewish kids were being Jewish in the public school. But we were among the few who kept Shabbat and kept the Chagim.
And you can ask you, during this time, did you know what was going on in Europe? With the Shoah, what was happening to the Jews in...
Right.
Did you know what was happening?
Yes.
Because many people say that
Yes.
they didn't know till only after the war.
Yes, yes. No. I knew what was happening during the war. And then became a student of the Shoah. One of the early students of the Shoah.
You were the pioneer.
About among American historians, I was really one of the early ones.
And I think your mother...
Not one of the great ones, just one of the
I
early
think you were
ones.
possibly the greatest. But good, I want to just mention your mother had a connection with Einstein, with Albert Einstein.
Say again?
Your mother had a connection with Albert Einstein, And
Oh
she
yes,
tried to
by mail.
organize.
Yes,
She tried to organize a visa
Yeah.
for your father.
yes,
That's incredible.
yes. He was very kind.
Did you meet him?
No. No, but I had a good friend with whom I played soccer who lived in a house that had a good, that had a good friend of Einstein. So when Herbie Scheinholz took me into his apartment to meet his father, he explained to me that on another floor was a friend of Einstein.
And then eventually you moved into Miller Avenue. Eventually you moved into Miller Avenue.
Right.
And you have a picture of the home. And when your father came back, when your father returned, how was the interaction when you saw your father again? Because you had been separated for so many years. It's not an easy question.
No, it's not a difficult question at all. It's not a difficult question at all, because I was already a teenager by then. And I had made a personal commitment on my own, personal commitment. I would become my father's son. So, if he wanted me to change my hairstyle, I changed my hairstyle as a teenager. And so on and so forth.
And you did. He told you to...
I did.
But your parents were they were happily married?
I think so. I'm sure it was very difficult. So I don't know. If a husband is in a concentration camp from 1939, 40 to 45, etc., 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 I have no idea.
Here's a lovely picture of you and your father in 1951. And your father managed to eventually find work?
Yes, he did. It was hard for him because initially he got into jobs for which his physical makeup was not prepared. So he had to leave that particular job and then had to leave another job, and finally found his way back to becoming the salesman that he had been in Germany, and found a wonderful employer. And
then eventually you went on to
Brooklyn College, right.
Here's a lovely... Can you show us in the picture where you are? This is a lovely picture in Brooklyn College. You were always a good sportsman.
Yeah. This guy was the best player on the team. This is his brother. They were the Mahler brothers. His father was an Olympic soccer player. I think I was number 2.
Gerd, what made you interested in pursuing a career in the arts, in history and American history in particular?
I think it was very mundane. somewhere along the way I developed a liking for history, and I thought I was becoming a high school teacher.
Your brother became a high school
Principal.
A principal, yeah.
I thought I would become a high school teacher. And I went, at Brooklyn College, I went through all courses for high school teaching. Initially, it never occurred to me I'd become a professor at a university. And then, one thing led to another. I went to Brooklyn College and I had wonderful teachers, and they kind of opened the door to the possibility that I become a professional historian. Yeah. It was very hard work, very hard, because my family needed me, and I worked while I went to the day session. I started out at night school at Brooklyn College for 1 year. And then my father insisted that I switch to the day session. He helped me make all the right choices.
And your decision to go to college and then to become a professor, when in that journey you must have met so many amazing historians, and you must have had incredible professors as well, and teachers.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. Very fortunate.
Gerd, I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. There are no words, really, no words to express my sincere and deep appreciation. You know, I think you must be one of the premier historian. Not only are you a historian, but you lived through it. You are eyewitness to the history. And to be the pioneer in... I think something's going on. I'm going to start it again. Just going to start it again. Okay. So I just want to thank you again. So importantness, okay. So Gerd, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. It's been the greatest honor and privilege being with you, and you relating the most, I don't know, there's no words to explain. It's just been, there are no words. You are our witness to our history, and what you've gone through showcases, and it's not only were you the pioneer in bringing Holocaust to American academia, but you lived it. You are our witness of the history. You are a living example of the history, and the way you relate it, I'm lost for words. But it's been such an honor and a privilege to be here.
Right.
And I am so eternally grateful to you. And I think you are not only an example we can all strive to emulate, but you are remarkable. And I think your parents were also remarkable. They were heroes. And you and your brother, the connection that you and your brother had, is something, it's just spectacular.
Right.
So if I can ask you, I just want to mention that you, including in the various books that you've written, you were also you did the book The Hunter and the Hunted, and you have Elie Wiesel in the book, and Simon Wiesenthal. You have the greats in Jewish history that contributed to your book.
Right.
But you yourself, I think, not only were you a pioneer, but you are, I think, one of the most amazing, not only professors, but authors, but your story is one of the most amazing stories of the Shoah. It really is. So if I could ask you, what message do you give? Do you relate to your children and your grandchildren? What message do you give to the future generations? Because you've seen so much in your life.
At 96, I don't think I have a message. wonderful children, wonderful friends, teachers, and I'd leave the future to them.
So I want to thank you so much.
But you can
And
come back
I'm-
again. He's got many more wonderful
I am
stories.
so incredibly grateful. And Alana, thank you very much as well.
No. Daddy was a very beloved professor, and he did many things with students. He didn't talk about anything here, but he did many things with students. But this student was one of the star students at the ILR school where Daddy was a professor, and he was asked to identify his most favorite professor and why. And so this was the ceremony where Daddy was honored.
Wow.
You'll
Thank you
excuse
so
me.
much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
There. So thank you. That's Daddy.